My girlfriend broke up with me when she found out I only had 9 toes. She was lactose intolerant. Today, I'm going to recap a 2015 action-adventure film called In the Heart of the Sea. The film begins in the year 1850, with a writer named Herman Melville arriving on Nantucket Island. He's there to meet an elderly former innkeeper, Thomas Nickerson, the sole remaining survivor from the sinking of a whaling ship, the Essex. When Herman knocks, Thomas's wife, mistaking him for a patron, informs him they're not open. However, after Herman shows her a letter and introduces himself, she lets him in. Herman then approaches Thomas, eager to learn about the Essex's ordeal, but Thomas initially refuses to speak about it. In an effort to persuade him, Herman offers all his money in exchange for the story, but Thomas rebuffs him with harsh words and asks him to leave. Feeling insulted, Herman starts to depart, but Thomas's wife intervenes. She apologizes for her husband and asks Herman to stay. She then speaks to Thomas, reminding him of their financial struggles, which ultimately convinces him to agree to her request. Thomas tells Herman he'll narrate the story as long as he can tolerate it. The movie then transports us back to 1820, a time when whaling was common. Whales were hunted for their oil, a valuable commodity that people traded and even gambled over. We meet a Nantucket farmer and whaler named Owen Chase, who is joyfully married to Peggy. Owen, employed by a whaling company, excitedly goes to see his bosses, expecting to be appointed as captain of their new vessel, the Essex. However, his joy turns to disappointment when he finds out they've changed their minds, offering him the role of first mate instead. They've chosen George Pollard, an inexperienced sailor from a well-known whaling family, as captain. Owen is visibly upset and considers leaving, but the executives offer him a pay raise and promise him the captain's position next time. Owen agrees, but only if they'd put this promise in writing. The following day, he prepares himself for a year-long whale hunting journey. His wife, though, looks worried. As he's about to leave, she gives him her locket and asks him to promise that he'll come back safely. Later, at the ship dock, many whalers gather to see a group, including a 14-year-old Thomas working as a cabin boy, depart on the Essex. As the ship sets sail, Captain George begins giving orders to his subordinates, leading to a slight disagreement. Soon, they encounter a problem. The ship's sail gets jammed, disrupting its stability. Owen steps in, skillfully climbing up the mast to release the sail. George, lacking experience, feels a pang of jealousy seeing Owen's competence and later takes out his frustration during dinner. He makes harsh comments about Owen and his father, angering Owen. Unable to confront the captain directly, Owen leaves the table in a huff. From the next day, George resumes commanding Owen, who reluctantly obeys. At one point, Owen spots an approaching storm and quickly informs the captain, advising a change in course. George, however, ignores this suggestion and decides to proceed. The storm soon strikes, severely damaging the ship. Amidst the chaos, George orders a retreat, but Owen insists it's too late and tells everyone to hold on. Fortunately, the crew manages to survive. Post-storm, George announces his plan to return to Nantucket Island for repairs. He also demands that Owen write a letter of apology for disobeying orders and endangering the crew. This infuriates Owen, who confronts George, blaming him for recklessly sailing into the storm. George, proud and defensive, warns Owen not to overstep his boundaries and brags about his family's legacy. After a tense exchange, they eventually decide to set aside their differences and collaborate. The narrative then jumps ahead 3 months, with the Essex sailing deep in the ocean. It's here they finally spot a large group of whales. Eagerly, they get into their small boats and head towards these grand animals to hunt. Owen successfully harpoons a sperm whale, which dives deep underwater. The crew waits for it to perish, but it keeps diving. As their ropes nearly run out, the crew considers cutting it loose to prevent being pulled under. However, Owen advises patience, and just in time, the whale succumbs. They then drag the whale back to the ship to start extracting its oil. But they hit a snag. The opening in the whale's head is too small, complicating the process. Therefore, Thomas, the youngest and smallest crew member, is assigned to crawl inside the whale's head to gather the remaining oil. Time passes with no further whale sightings, and the Essex's food supply dwindles. George realizes there are no whales in the Atlantic and decides to venture past Cape Horn into the Pacific, hoping for better luck. Eventually, they reach Atacames, Ecuador, where they encounter a Spanish captain. He mentions the plentiful offshore grounds 2,000 miles west, but warns of a gigantic, vengeful white whale that wrecked his ship and killed 6 men. Ignoring his cautionary tale as mere folklore, George and Owen lead their crew westward. 14 months later, they reach the offshore ground in the vast ocean. True to the Spanish captain's word, they find numerous whales. The crew, thrilled at the prospect of abundant oil, quickly heads out in their boats towards the whales. As they prepare to start hunting, a huge sperm whale with a white, scarred body suddenly attacks Owen's boat, flipping it over. After this incident, Owen and his crew swim back to the Essex and begin fixing their boat swiftly. In the midst of their repairs, the white whale strikes the Essex again, causing a leak at its base and throwing the crew into chaos. Yet Owen remains determined to capture this whale, so he reinforces the harpoon and throws it at the creature. The harpoon hits its mark, and the whale dives down. The rope, tied to the mast, soon runs out, leading to the ship's structure giving way. As a result, the harpoons lodged in the whale are dislodged, freeing it once more. With the Essex sinking quickly, the crew decides to leave the ship. They gather as much food as they can and board the 3 remaining whaling boats. At this moment, the stored whale oil ignites, causing the ship to explode. Now, the crew faces the daunting task of sailing hundreds of miles to land with limited supplies. The next morning, they consult the sea map and begin their challenging voyage. A few days into their journey, a severe storm hits, injuring one of the crew, Matthew, who is also Owen's childhood friend. They survive the storm and press on, but as the weeks go by, their exhaustion grows. They are reduced to subsisting on just a piece of biscuit each day. Owen cares for Matthew, but the rest of the crew starts to see him as a liability. On the 34th day at sea, they finally see an island, reviving their hope. They eagerly head towards it, but Owen, sensing something wrong, orders a halt. It turns out to be the same white whale that has been pursuing them. The whale attacks again, wrecking their boats and casting them into the sea. Some crew members perish, others drown, while the rest are washed ashore on the island. Upon reaching the island, they desperately consume whatever they can find, including raw fish and bird eggs. That night, they set up camp in a small tunnel on the island, lighting a fire in hopes of signaling any ships that might pass by. Yet weeks go by with no sign of rescue. One day, while looking for food, Owen stumbles upon the remains of previous shipwreck victims in a cave. This grim discovery leads him to the conclusion that help might never come, and they could share the same fate. He persuades the crew to leave the island, fearing they might perish there waiting for a ship. They then start fixing their damaged boat for departure. On the day they're set to leave, all but 4 of the crew, including the injured Matthew, decide to stay, having lost all hope. Owen, still clinging to a sliver of hope, vows to send a rescue party once he gets home. With that, he and the remaining crew members set sail. By the 48th day adrift, 1 crew member succumbs to starvation. The rest contemplate casting his body into the sea, but Owen proposes a harrowing alternative. They should not discard anything that could sustain their lives. Despite initial shock, the desperate crew resorts to cannibalism for survival, a decision that deeply distresses young Thomas. In the present, an older Thomas, haunted by his actions, halts his narration. Herman, deeply affected by the tale, inquires if Thomas has ever shared this story with anyone. Thomas confesses he's kept it from even his wife, fearing she might judge him. Just then, his wife, having overheard the story, enters and assures him of her unchanged love, giving Thomas the courage to complete his narrative. Returning to the past, after 71 days at sea, the crew is now scattered by the currents, with 1 boat lost. The dire circumstances have worsened to the extent that those in George's boat resort to drawing straws to decide who will be sacrificed as their next source of sustenance. On another day, the white whale reappears, and Owen prepares for what could be their final confrontation. As the whale surfaces briefly, Owen notices a part of his previously thrown harpoon still stuck above the whale's eye. In a moment of hesitation, he locks eyes with the whale. and there's a silent exchange between them. Ultimately, Owen decides not to harm the whale and lowers his harpoon. The white whale then departs into the ocean, never to be seen again. In the following days, a ship passing by rescues George's boat. Meanwhile, Owen's boat, with no food or water, drifts perilously close to death's door until it fortuitously reaches an island off Chile. The survivors there are saved and eventually return to Nantucket, reuniting with their worried families. Before they can settle back into their lives, the survivors are called by the Nantucket Shipping Company leaders for a debrief. The company heads asked George and Owen to keep the story under wraps to safeguard the industry's image. Owen, however, stands against this, insisting on the importance of honoring the crew's experiences. Disgusted with the company's deceit, Owen resigns. Before leaving, he has a final encounter with young Thomas, gifting him a whale bone pin. The next day in court, inspired by Owen, George bravely tells the truth, much to the dismay of the company executives. Thomas, in the present day, recounts how Owen kept his promise and sent a ship to rescue the men left on the island. Sadly, they find that Matthew didn't survive, but they rescue the other three. Thomas shares that Owen went on to become a merchant captain, while George made another unsuccessful attempt to hunt the white whale. After hearing the whole saga, Herman is deeply moved, thanking Thomas and noting that he has learned a powerful lesson about courage. In the concluding scene, we witness Herman having finished writing his novel titled Moby Dick. This book goes on to achieve tremendous success, becoming one of the biggest hits in America. If you enjoyed this video, don't be shy to hit the like button, and if you disliked it, hit the dislike button twice, just to be sure. It would be best if you watched the whole movie. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe for more videos like this.